Welcome to the video. Today's going to be a bit of a two-parter, so partially going to be a vlog of me going to QCon, which is a conference that I went to this week, and then partially me sharing some of my own thoughts on senior engineering, what that means to me, what do I think the term means in the industry in general. All the bits in this video are obviously quite subjective though, so as you should do with anything on the internet really, you should take these opinions with probably a grain of salt. Before the vlog, just to give a little bit of background on QCon and what it is. QCon are a series of conferences that are held around the world every year. They're aimed at engineers who are senior upwards, and the talks tend to be quite technically oriented. The conferences are usually fairly large and contain multiple parallel tracks over the course of a few days. This week I was attending QCon here in London, and as part of that I was also chairing a panel based on socially conscious software. So me and a few other folks were talking about what that means to us and about using tech for good. I'm quite excited to share this one because usually I find conferences a little bit overwhelming, and so I thought actually 3 full days might end up being a bit too much, but I really enjoyed this one and I was very happy to be on stage for once, as usually I'm giving talks to slightly smaller audiences at meetups and at events and things. Right, on to the vlog. I jump onto the train to head into the venue in the morning. I get to the conference centre, I queue for about 30 seconds, then remember I'm a speaker and head inside to get my ticket. I check out the schedule for the week and then grab a seat in the main hall. And then the event kicks off with a keynote for the first day, which is Leslie Miley talking about AI bias and sustainability. I then go to a talk about feature flags, which is a sponsored talk from a feature flag company, but it's actually surprisingly non-salesy, and I take a fair few notes on things. There are breaks between all the talks, so I go to check out the company stands, and also say hello to my friends at my previous company's stand. Then I go to a talk about psychological safety as a staff engineer, and then one about building a long-term career as an engineer. I take a quick break to pray, and then it's time for a talk about the parallels between software engineering and construction. Lack of diversity in tech sucks, but it does mean no queue for the women's toilets at conferences, which I do enjoy. Somewhat ironically, I then go to a women in tech lunch over lunchtime, and then there's a cool talk in the afternoon about Zoom's architecture and how they handled scale during the pandemic. Another break, so I head upstairs to check out the views, and then the final talk of the day about Monzo's use of microservices. It's now 6:30 and almost time to break my fast, so I head home to eat and then sleep. I head in for day 2 of the conference. It's extremely grey, in big contrast to all the sun the day before. I'm a little late, so I have to sit in the back, although I do fare better than the folks who came very late so ended up sitting on the floor. We hear a bit about the history of QCon, and then I fangirl a bit over the absolute icon that is Radio Perlman as she talks about her work on computer networks. My track is running today, so our track host introduces the speakers, and then I head to a talk by my friend Sarah around digital exclusion and how we should tackle it, which also includes this absolute gem of a screenshot from the NHS content guide. A quick break for snacks, which I'm not eating but everyone else is, and then the next talk in my track, which is about understanding the carbon footprint of building and running software. I head out for a walk for lunchtime, and then it's time for the next 2 talks in my track, which are about the social responsibilities that companies hold, and then a talk about why big tech companies are problematic and what we can do about that as workers. It's then time for the panel which I'm chairing, which obviously I don't film as I'm speaking, but this is us setting up, and then I close up the day with a talk about handling very large code bases. There's time for a break before the evening's events, and then we walk along the Thames to the venue for tonight's speakers dinner, which is a restaurant and a boat, which is pretty cool. I spend a few hours at the speakers dinner, which is after sunset so I can actually eat, and then I head home to flop into bed. Another very grey day as I head to the conference for the final day. I'm on time today, so I do some reading for uni while I wait for the talks to start, and then we kick off with the third keynote around microservices at Netflix. I then head to the first talk of the day, which is about green software engineering. Another break, and then a talk about the use of digital twins for making data-driven decisions. There's a long break for lunch, and then a super interesting talk about responsible AI around the analysis and mitigation of risk for AI systems, which is obviously very interesting to me as this is a lot of what I study at uni. I spend the next break scouting out desserts that I can take home for the evening after I've broken my fast, and then I go to the panel event for the sustainability track, which I then follow with another panel for the remote and hybrid working track. Then it's the final break and the closing reception, which I don't go to as I'm not drinking anything. And then it's time for the closing keynote, which is a fantastic talk from Alistair Allen about the multitude of problems with AI technologies as they currently exist. And that's the end of the conference, so I head out into the rain to process the last 3 days. So that was the vlog. Hopefully you enjoyed that. If you're still here after however many minutes that was edited down, then you probably did. Off the back of attending that and hearing from a lot of very senior engineers, I thought it would be interesting to share some of my own reflections around what it means when people say the term senior engineer. For some background, I'm a senior engineer at a health tech startup in London. My background for the last few years has been in health tech. Before that, I was working in various other tech startups in London. I've been engineering on and off since 2014, during which time I also did an undergrad in computer science, which was peppered in the middle by other bits of working. My earlier roles were semi-technical, and then in 2019 I moved into being a software engineer as my primary job title, and then since then I've been doing engineering full-time. The term senior engineer itself is, in my opinion, quite nebulous in the tech industry. It doesn't particularly tie to any number of years or any specific milestones, but more to this kind of vague idea around having reached a level of seniority and having reached a level of skill. Most companies have the title senior, staff, sometimes principal, and at larger companies there are often multiple levels to each of those roles. But they definitely don't mean the same thing company to company. So a staff engineer in one place is not necessarily a staff engineer elsewhere, and the expectations can be very different for the same title, but in different companies. I don't think there's a single definition for me to land on here, but I do think that there are some things that people generally mean when they talk about being a senior engineer, and those things can be roughly broken down into technical and non-technical. So let's discuss the technical ones first. I think a big part of being senior is about having a decent amount of technical experience. I think how this manifests most is in being able to pattern match things. So being able to see problems and having seen them before, so already have a solution in mind, and also being able to preempt issues in solutions that people are proposing because you've seen them fail before. I don't think there's a specific bar for number of years of experience that makes someone senior, but I do think having worked on multiple code bases and multiple projects can be a good indicator of having built up those skills. Related to that is also the ability to jump into a code base without having a huge amount of guidance, and having the know-how to be able to introduce a new technology to a code base. The other key technical thing for being a senior engineer is, I think, being able to take technical ownership. This can mean a lot of different things, but for me it's partially about being able to take wider technical decisions, such as architectural decisions or what technologies you're using, but also about being able to improve the code base proactively. So adding monitoring, refactoring things, adding documentation, these sorts of things. In lots of places, once you're senior and upwards, you're also expected to be able to do technical breakdown of projects. So taking a large piece of work and breaking that down into smaller chunks of work and understanding how to release those safely. This leads us quite nicely into the non-technical aspect. These are often called soft skills in comparison to the technical skills, which are hard skills. But I'm not a big fan of this sort of terminology, as I think it often downplays the non-technical skills, which in my experience often prove to be a more important part of being a good senior engineer versus the technical skills, although obviously both of them are quite important. So part of leading technical projects is being able to do the technical breakdown and understanding what code changes need to be made. But I think the other half of that is being able to understand the wider context of the change that you're making. This can mean understanding the business needs of what you're working on and what other teams are working on, and then also being engaged with the user needs, why are you building what you're building, and also what kind of things can be cut out of the scope of a project if needs be. Aside from the technical side of working with others, once you're senior, you're also expected to do a bit more mentoring of engineers who are junior to you. So as well as working with the other engineers in your team, making a particular effort to work with the junior engineers and with apprentices to make sure that they're developing technically and also that they're just getting on okay. Alongside that, as you get more senior, more of the work around building team culture also becomes part of your role. So setting the tone for how the team will work together and also working to improve team processes that aren't going so well. The final skill, and probably the most important skill for senior engineers, is communication and being able to do that effectively. So not just understanding how to communicate things with other engineers, but also working to push things outside of your team. So for example, presenting your team's work at company meetings or at team check-ins, and also being able to work with people in non-engineering roles and really being able to communicate technical concepts to people who are not technical. We spoke earlier about technical ownership, and part of that when you're a senior engineer is also communicating those changes to people outside of your team. So notifying other teams of the work that you're doing, making sure that things don't overlap with other people's in-flight work, and if it does, then coordinating releases with other teams. So those are some of my main thoughts around what senior engineering means to me and my experience of being a senior engineer. Again, the term is really very undefined in the industry, and I'm always curious to hear other people's thoughts on the matter as well. So do drop a comment below if you have thoughts. That's the video. Bye! Should I have filmed this in a day where I had more saliva? Probably. I've forgotten to put the mic in. Of course I have. Over there. Over there. Why is this camera at an angle? What does that say? Will I ever remember to look in the camera lens? No.